Professor, in the previous section you mentioned a few more sub-skills to pay attention to. Those, however, were not discussed.
Yes, in the last section, we did not discuss documentation and corporate hierarchy because these are some topics I will be talking about in depth. So let us start with documentation. Documentation skills are consciously ignored by traditional placement tutorials and existing educational setups, although various varieties of documentation skills are required across a large range of professional tasks. Documentation can be of two types. Formal documentation tests how well you can comprehend official material and use it to accomplish the designated tasks. It also dictates how well you can communicate with the top brass of the organization and with your superior. Informal documentation dictates your relationships with other people within the organization, leaving thank you notes, written reminders and filed suggestions for your fellow employees formulate the crux of the informal documentation duties that you have as an employee.
Professor, in the corporate world, documentation is super important because everything needs to be recorded and stored in case it's needed in the future, right? For every question regarding the company or for a project, there's proper documentation to prove that it is authentic. But does this documentation help us as an individual? Does this have any effects on us? Does it help in any sort of development?
Well, firstly, your documentation needs to be precise and without errors. If it is not precise, it would be barely admissible and will not give a true account of the task that you have performed, your performance stats, the problems you have faced, etc. This is why good documentation entails in you a sense of precision that you can abide by. Now any task that you perform has a certain degree of precision and accuracy. Besides that, you become increasingly confident if the claims you are making through the task are backed by records. There is ample evidence for you to approach problems then and describe them to people, and you end up learning immensely. Your documents also have to be clear and easily understandable. They should not be complex and should not give out ideas which confuse your superiors and your colleagues. Clear and easily understandable documentation before performing the task will give you an idea of how to prepare clear reports while performing the task. This will give you a sense of clarity of work too. It also increases the ability to resolve an independent approach towards a task. Documenting the details of the task will allow you to resolve an approach to pursue the task, because you will be able to ideate a lot more with concrete evidence. Lastly, you also get a general sense of accomplishment because tasks are readily descriptive on paper.
The sense of accomplishment is pretty important for confidence and motivation. Now that we know there are several benefits of documentation, there must also be some drawbacks of not knowing how to document things. Not everyone has the presence of mind and skill to document every little thing. Does that affect them in any way?
People are often deprived of opportunities due to their lack of proper documentation skills. The lack of requisite documentation skills will lead to reduced comprehension by you, because the task is written down in an inappropriate format, and the important information with regards to the task is not covered. Hence, you would lack requisite clarity, leading to a compromise in the quality of work. Your performance would be assessed poorly because there would be no documentation which would give an account of your performance and progress. This would affect your ability to improve your performance in the future and limit you to ask for benefits if your performance is good. Your hard work, when documented, yields immense benefit. On the other hand, you may leak confidential information to outside sources.
Those are some extremely serious consequences. I'll probably get nightmares about accidentally leaking important information and getting fired. Professor, if a person doesn't know where to start or how to go about this process, what would you tell them?
There are certain basic guidelines which you can adopt to get started with basic documentation. Start by simply jotting down points to document events. Do not indulge in elaborate infographics and flowcharts at the very outset because you may use them inappropriately and that may hamper the quality of the document. Start through simple pointers and headers. Make it easy to understand. Use language that you yourself are able to easily understand. Do not use a lot of complex jargon, as that may make your argument incomprehensible. Collaborate with other people and use their comments to improve the document. Update their suggestions which you wish to adopt on a regular basis and use their insights. Do not finalize the first draft and always wait for newer developments that can improve your document substantially. Let the structure evolve organically and on the basis of your research and proceedings of the project. Learn how to format the document properly. This will make it more attractive and easier to read. Use headings, subheadings, pointers, bullets, tables etc. to make a naturally beautiful document. Know when you have hit a dead end and when it's time to eliminate extra content. You may reach this stage after all the content and dimensions have been taken into account, and it is finally time to prune the document and edit it for more clarity.
So, Professor, let me summarize what you've said about documentation. Documentation can be formal, as well as informal, both having several benefits such as increase in confidence, clarity, and a sense of achievement. There are several ways we may lose out on opportunities because of the lack of this skill. To improve at it, we need to start simple, keep taking suggestions, and adding comments and reviews to the document, making it a structured document.
You summed it up quite well. That is the crux of the topic.
Wonderful. I'm glad I am understanding all that we've discussed so far. What will we be talking about now?
Now, we will try to understand corporate hierarchy. To gauge the atmosphere of an organization you are newly recruited in, an astute understanding of how reporting hierarchies operate within the organization is supremely important.
There are several types of hierarchies that we've seen in our lives. In schools, the hierarchies go from students to the class monitor, the class teacher, the headmistress, and finally the principal. A similar mechanism is followed in colleges and other educational institutions. So in a workplace, the hierarchy starts from the CEO, right?
Before trying to understand how hierarchy manifests within the corporate environment, let us look at another example. Remember that hierarchies do not necessarily mean an accumulation of power, rather they primarily mean a flow of responsibility and communication to ensure smooth functioning. When you approach a government office for a formality, you are often greeted by a hierarchy of personnel who direct you to different tasks to get work done. This shows that hierarchy allows a chain of not only command but also action. Now, talking about the corporate hierarchy, there are two primary approaches. In the top-down approach, the orders are issued by the superiors and constructive decision-making is undertaken only by the top-level management or at least experienced professionals instead of recruits. Fresher employees do not directly approach superiors to give an update on work, rather they are called upon to give updates. Employees are bound by the orders they are given. On the other hand, the bottom-up approach is followed to decentralized decision-making in the organization wherein the entire staff is considered to be capable enough to partake in organizational processes. Division-specific decisions are at times taken by the departments themselves. You need to recognize, respect and adapt yourself to the corporate hierarchies that exist in your organizations. Authority reporting relationships ought to be established at the very outset for fresher employees.
Professor, who really decides these hierarchies? How do people even decide who comes after whom?
When approaching hierarchies, and understanding the workplace atmosphere, you ought to understand that these hierarchies are not arbitrary. Power dynamics exist because some employees have either stayed in the organization for prolonged periods and are hence at a level of seniority or they are experts in a particular field or on a particular subject. They are dynamic and can be questioned in progressive organizations but should not be overridden. Purely horizontal organizations do not exist. Managers and bosses should act as facilitators, coordinators and mentors and should provide reasonable justification for their actions and orders.
As far as I know, manifestations of the corporate hierarchy have been experienced throughout history. And there are certain general indications of how these hierarchies essentially operate. Are there any tells or signs that show that the hierarchies are very blatant?
Of course there are. And if you observe these, it is important to remember that it needs to be evolved. The first tell is hierarchy mirroring. This means that decisions are made between equal members of the hierarchy and there is barely any inter-hierarchical level decision-making. There is only a transfer of information in the form of a chain of command. This means that a department manager would never interact with the CEO to make decisions for the organization and usually, a CEO would not step in to make decisions for the department. In such a setup, it is very important for you to interact very well with your peers and immediate superiors, as they are more likely to listen to you in the organization. The second tell can be decision churn. Often individuals at the same level of the hierarchy but in different departments and divisions veto decisions taken by other members of the department. Hence, it is important for you to note that a decision would often be revisited so that middle ground is obtained and the first word is never the final one. You would often find people invoking the name of the boss to get stuff done. Be very cautious of this. Ensure you take orders from your immediate superior and do not forget the importance of who you are supposed to report to. There are also complex mechanisms for simple processes. Whether it is a grievance redressal system or a feedback structure, there are certain complex processes to get through to it. For instance, you may have to go through your department head to get through to your division head to obtain feedback. Be patient during this, as the end of the process may prove to be massively fruitful. Email is the most common form of professional communication in all organizations. The manner in which emails are written also indicate the level of seniority and hierarchy. The language in an email sent to you would have a commanding tone, while an email sent to you by your boss would have a very formal and obliging tone.
We know that there exists a hierarchy. How can we identify the same, and what is its significance? But what happens when the corporate hierarchy is not understood? If I don't understand the whole hierarchy, how will that affect me?
If you are not aware of who you are supposed to report to and take orders from, you are left in the dark with regard to who would assess your performance and what metric they would use. This ambiguity will be cleared if you can understand corporate hierarchy. If you do not understand the corporate structure, managers would not be able to fix your accountability for a particular task in the organization. You will also not be able to understand which manager to speak with if you have a grievance, or whether you need to approach the HR department, etc. These are details which will only be clear if you can gauge the corporate structure.
I'm here again with the section end questions. The questions for this particular section are as follows.